hang-ups, and male or female. So I think those are part of the next hope for women in the agricultural revolution also. I just wanted to give them a plug. But these have worked with local extension people, the women in the middle here, and local populations to do this very, very wonderful test trials of what works with drip irrigation using no-till and till. And so they had all the trials clearly marked out, and new ideas about water supply. And of course we know that irrigation is one of the main keys, and mostly women have had only rain-fed plots. So that's another thing to look for. Northern Ghana. I thought I was back in the 70s. It was my 6th time to be in Ghana, and I've always been in southern Ghana, which is hustling, bustling. Ghana is the 5th fastest growing country in the world. You know, super highways, 6 lanes in each direction. You know, supermarkets, malls, everybody driving SUVs. Yeah. You know, it's really something. But here we are in northern Ghana, and this is what it looks like. It also seemed to have a mosque in every village. In fact, I almost didn't realize it was a mosque because it was so integrated into the village landscape. And there you can see it in the background as well, in the one slide here. And traditional patriarch of the family, it's patrilineal, patrilocal, patriarchal, and his 3 wives and their houses. And this woman is working with shea nuts. I think everybody's using shea butter in their cosmetics now. This is the area where shea trees grow and where it's being processed by women, and the body shop is there. But you wouldn't see that in these kinds of technologies, but they are having these women collect all this stuff, and then they're processing it. They don't get very much for it. Well, in terms of the projects on calves, here's an example. Let me just say that these 2 women were leaders in the community-based organizations, and the project recruited men and women, and the men were very, very articulate, by the way, of the need for women to be participants in the trials and to be part of the project and how much it had helped them. And all of them were just bragging about the women. And you'll see one of my last slides, you have to be able to brag about what women are doing to know that it has some merit. You have to brag about them.
What's a CBO?
A community-based organization. So what is very interesting for these women, they were saying, you know, we did not believe it. We did not believe that there wouldn't be so much weeding. And we didn't believe that we didn't have to till it and have the plow services. They really didn't believe it. But they, you know, agreed to do it. They were community leaders. You can see how they look. They're well groomed, they're well dressed. You know, they're articulate. And they tried it. And now, they said, well, we really decided we weren't interested in farming, because I think they're fairly affluent, they can do something else. But now, they have doubled in 1 year the size of their plots. And they are, you know, they're seeing the business aspect of this, the marketing aspect. It's maize and soybean, by the way, are the crops. And so they can also hire other women at the lower level, those fractionated women we talked about yesterday, the day before, as laborers, and they can just start increasing. The more land they get hold of, the better, and they know how to market it. And the men who are sitting there said the same thing. I will say that the men sometimes increase their lands. They said, oh, well, I'm going to try to buy 10 hectares next year. Another one said, I'm thinking of 20. I don't know if they really can carry that out, but it's not an area of land scarcity, so maybe they can. But both sexes were very, very intrigued with the fact that they can really increase production, and the women in particular with the weeding. Because the men are already off duty in the ground preparation and the plowing, because that's part of the methodology, and that is mostly their task. Now, what's so very interesting, and what this builds on, is the previous 2 years of this project. they had the first year of the project, they got 28 women to be trial cooperators to do plantings, and they got land for these women from the chiefs, from their husbands. Lo and behold, guess what? It really worked out well. The soils even looked a little better. Can't do much in 1 year. It takes really about 4 years. But it looked better. Then it got better, and then took the land away, and they all had to drop out. So that is a huge, huge problem. And there's a lot of literature on that. The projects in the Gambia on onions are a classic example. The women got the onion production, it's all replicated, all great, then took it over. So that's another thing that is important to say. So they all dropped out. They had to restart with these new women who were community leaders who could not be intimidated as much. And now, as I've said, they doubled their production and they're purchasing even more land. So that's a very interesting. So we found out the constraints there. And one of the recommendations I put in the report was before you bring a project in, you better well negotiate with whom the powers be, with the men in charge both at local and regional level, maybe national if you possibly can, and say, we're going to have this project. It has women farmers as well as men farmers. They're going to have to be able to keep the land. They have to have some land tenure. We have to work out the land part. We can't just start these things, get people capacitated, solving the food security issues, and then all of a sudden it's pulled back from them. So I think people thought, we really have to work with the host countries and their partners to ensure secure land tenure for women. And what I also very much liked about this project was the fact that there was so much science in it. And the science and the technical aspects of how thick should the mold be, what the seeds like, when should you start the no-till. All of these things were being worked out so people could see the results and could understand them and do the training. And in other words, things weren't dumbed down for women in terms of science. And so they liked the science part of it. They understood it. Now, whether they could accomplish everything is another thing. Some of these women were illiterate, and some were literate. So it probably helps if you're literate to be able to reread those recommendations. But nevertheless, they do come from oral traditional societies, so they have good memories on things. But they like that. So I would say we need to use some of these sustainable agricultural development frameworks. FAO has one, USAID has one. Every agency is now putting out these kinds of guidelines. We do need watchdog legislation and institutions that can execute them. We do need beneficiaries who are scrutinized to be able to actually do these things. We do need the laws on land and land inheritance monitored. And we need to understand the risk-taking that some of these people do while they're trying to learn new things. It's pretty scary out there because we're dealing with real food security at the household level. And so there are risks, especially in areas where there are periodic droughts and other climatic changes. In other words, in Cambodia, people said the rains used to come in March and now they're coming in June. They've already observed that. They've already changed things as a result of that, but it's not actually to the good, so to speak. They can't do the climate change. They can't change that. They just have to understand the science of it. Also, we really have to do gender budgeting for these projects, not just have a little add-on or I always say that all these interventions, the first thing you look at is the budget. And you see if there are any ways that you're actually reaching both men and women. You're just talking to some people somewhere. You need to know. Better signatory conventions. I want to just say a word about that before I close. All these declarations feed into signatory conventions of the world's organizations, and particularly the United Nations or the policy in the United States or whatever country we happen to be living in. And I had the opportunity, this is a complicated slide, but don't bother with it at all, just the highlights there. This was going to Secretary General's background report on agriculture and policy options for implementation. And this section is titled, just like the Farm Bill title, there's one on land, and that should be scrutinized for things like this. And so here we have delegates, from all the United Nations countries sitting in session, 5 languages in translation, the full blocks and divisions and just the thing at the UN. And this was one of the first documents. Well, the way it works is somebody will write the documents, and then every country will have a chance to comment. Well, it would take forever if every country had a chance to comment, so they're in blocks. By the way, we are in the juice cans blocks. That's Japan, US, Australia, and New Zealand, and Canada. Like I might see in the wrong place there. But we're in the juice can block. And then, of course, you've heard of the G8, you've heard of the 77 plus China, yeah, that's right. 77 plus China, guess what? It's 130 plus China, okay? So you'll see what they did. But anyway, look at this. Due recognition to cultural and institutional context. That sounds really nice. That sounds really nice. And the recognition of customary tenure arrangements. What's wrong with customary tenure arrangements? That's what's given us every single thing we see about the poor, about the vulnerable, about women who don't have access to land. All of these customary tenure arrangements about why the chief and the husbands could take the land back. That's what produces it, and it looks really good. Looks really good. And yet you think, oh yeah, but then it's really not. So yeah, the G77. So they all argued, the G77, which is actually 130 countries in Africa, the Middle East, and China, they all argued, yes, we recognize customary, we recognize cultural. And then there was the Women in Development contingent, which consisted of women from all over the world, and we would caucus, and we would decide how could we rewrite these things. And I'm very pleased to say that I was able to, look at these bottom two here, promote women's equitable roles in decision-making, land management, land use planning, and access, and also to graze livestock and gather wood. That's pretty important for people at the bottom. And we also managed in the very final document to take out customary tenure, take out cultural rules and beliefs, and put in without discrimination against women and girls, with the recognition of equitable land rights and enforceable and secure land rights, in particular for women, indigenous groups, and other vulnerable groups. So just to be specific as to who the targeted audiences really are, as opposed to just maintaining customary business as usual. So to sum up, we have non-gendered. Non-gendered is business as usual. I've been enamored by this term, BAU, business as usual. And you see I keep using it here, but we could just, business as usual, yeah, just the way it is. For inputs, yeah, we could just leave the land stuff alone. Let's not change the policy. Yeah, we'll add gender later. I'll never forget one of the very first courses I taught on women in development. I think it was about 1981 at Virginia Tech, and there was a whole group of students from the Caribbean, men and women. And one student, male, at the end said, well, our countries are still developing. Why don't we let it finish developing and then we'll start including women? And I keep hearing that over and over again. But business as usual is non-gendered, okay? It seems to be kind of, it doesn't sound that bad, really. But gendered means that it's overruled by government will, and there's some idea of parity and equity, and we're actually using science and research to determine and solve problems. And it's, of course, linked to how we're going to make this the new revolution to increase food and security for the world's people. So I'm always impressed when both men and women, because women can also criticize other women quite a bit, when both men and women brag about women's success. And when I hear that, I know the project's on its right track. And all these projects that I saw, this most recent group, boy, I cannot believe it. All these people are just bragging about their women farmers. And it really was amazing. So I'll leave you with this idea that women are not all alike in their needs. Men need to assist and not resist. And of course, we want peaceful and not conflictual situations for all this to take place in. And I'll take questions. This is what I wrote for the IRAS Declaration, and it's on the website. And I'm hoping people can help shorten it and make it more pithy. Thank you very much.
Thank you for your wonderful presentation, challenging presentation, and insightful one. In a sense, summarizing many, many years of work and insights all in one place. This is really remarkable tour de force that you've given for us this morning. Quite amazing. I think we're going to line up for questions just as we have done in the past. And I'm going to help pour coffee amongst all the people over here so that we can have a continuous flow, if you will. And we're happy to bring you a cup too.
Oh, okay.
Okay. Okay, sir? Okay, very good. Okay, real sure. Okay. I just have to emphasize one thing else that you said that is critically important. Gender, you talked about gender, and you also talked about a new technology. And we've also been talking about the indigenous people of the world. And there is a miraculous change that in many respects that is occurring. And this is going to be the next potential revolution to overcome the lack of food that the Green Revolution provided up to date. The combination of this new technology that was developed, you might want to talk about how a Jesuit priest was the originator of this new technology, has only been recently scientifically investigated. It's been around for a long time, but that's because somebody outside of science developed it, as I see it. And so I think that's an important piece of it. The second thing is this really increases the productivity of the land. And that means, if you remember in that first diagram, that there are many more people in the world and there's a lot less land available, and the great need for intensification, and there is the potential for intensification amongst the indigenous people. So I just wanted you to sort of underline some of those issues, if you don't mind. Just comment to the comment, if you will, and I'll get you a cup of coffee. And we'll start with the next question right after.
Yeah. Conservation agriculture has been around, I understand, since the 70s and 80s. In a way, it's not new, but the way it's being, and it was mostly developed for commercial agriculture and not really made appropriate, site-specifically appropriate for smallholder farmers. That's number one. Guess where in the world it is practiced the most? France, France is one, but it's Brazil. Brazil seems to have the most hectareage acreages under, but I think they do it in France too. And it's mostly been in commercial production. The fact that it can be applicable to smallholders, and they can actually see and touch the land and see that it has improved is just amazing. In that northern Ghana situation, I didn't have time to tell you. I didn't have time to tell you that some of the men would wear out the land that they were farming with their corn crops. And they cut the residues and market the residues, you know, for thatch and animal fodder. They would then, if the land got so bad that it was sandy and horrible, they would give that little plot of land to women for them to grow legumes. And we know that soybeans, of course, fix nice nitrogen in the soil. So if the women, you know, eked out some soybeans there over a few years, the land got better. And if it got better, they took it back. The men took it back. So I find that, and the women were telling us that, and I'm saying, well, like, what are you doing about it? They just hadn't gotten that far in their thinking. They were just scientists observing what had happened. So, or empiricists, let's put it that way. But those are the very ones who are now seeing the difference with this methodology. So it could be the next follow-on to the Green Revolution, and it could be done in conjunction with those kinds of things as well. It's not for everyone, it's not for everywhere. It's just where it works, it's a good thing. So I hope that helps out. Yeah.
Thank you. I actually have an announcement, but I'll just say in the guise of a question here, how much I appreciate your eye-opening research and the new perspective it offered, because it's something I had never thought about regarding this whole area. And there are other researchers, this is a segue, who have brought their posters to us, who want to discuss their research with you. And the announcement is that the poster sessions will continue this afternoon concurrently with the workshops. So from 2 to 4:30, you can drop by the Gullen Hall and speak with the other researchers who are here about their posters and about their research. We encourage you to do that.
I'm Roger Brown. Thank you very much. One of the things that I have observed for processes for empowerment with small coffee growers in Brazil, for example, is the creation of cooperatives. And I've been meaning and forgetting that in some of our other lectures that's been relevant. I haven't heard much about cooperatives, and I'm wondering whether there are, perhaps in the case of women empowerment, some inability to, if they don't have the ownership, they can't create cooperatives. But I wonder what's happening in that realm. And the other thing that occurs to me that I knew about the coffee process was that it was seasonal. So they were doing ecotourism in Costa Rica as an addition. And there might be other partnered kinds of things they could do along with the agriculture.
Yeah. It's very, the topic of cooperatives I think is very, very important because they are one of the keys to marketing product from smallholders. Obviously, in areas where women were not members, or could not be members, or didn't have production to sell, cooperatives didn't affect them in any way, shape, or form. But in the contemporary period, with these advantaged people, it depends where they are. If they struck out on their own, like these large commercial farmers and some of the examples I gave you, they don't need cooperatives. But in the northern Ghana case, those community-based organizations, they're functioning like cooperatives. And here's a really interesting problem that the men brought up, and the women agreed that it was true. The production, the cooperatives had built cement platforms, especially for the soybeans, but they also used it for the maize, to take the crop, and especially once it was dried, and they then brought it ready for the cooperatives to market. And they would put it on the slabs to get out dirt and rocks and so forth, so it was a better product, and they get more for it. And with the increase in production, they were just, and it kind of happened in such a short period of time that they didn't know what to do. So they were contemplating, should we buy plastic tarps to put this on there? This was the members of the cooperative, and they had some that were all men, some were all women, and some that were mixed. And they were grappling with the idea of how to increase the sorting surfaces fast enough for the increase in production. So they were well with it. But the thing about cooperatives is they too have to plug into value chains and to the market. It's easier for them in some ways because it's larger, bulk, and maybe better spokespersons at the top running the market, the cooperatives, to do that. But they have also been other downsides in terms of the leaders getting more benefits than the rest of the members. So I didn't see that in this particular case, but that is true in other areas. And in terms of the seasonality, also in the northern Ghana case, men are gone. It's very arid, and there's only one growing season there. In Cambodia, there can be up to 2 or 3 growing seasons, and Haiti up to 2. Yeah, 1 or 2. But in Ghana, there's really only 1. And as a result of that, some percentage of men migrate out of the area. So it's not like they're doing those alternative things in their areas. They're actually leaving women and children in order to be able to earn cash. Sometimes they don't come back. Most of the time they do. But it's not a local kind of market. And also in terms of tourism, I had a PhD student who studied this in the High Atlas Mountains in Morocco. And she was convinced in all her research proposals, and she was so well funded. Everybody was convinced that she was onto something here, that all these tourists, particularly from France to Morocco, were going to do all kinds of things to bring better income to women in the area. And the women had been agriculturalists, and they were going to be able to move out of agriculture because of all the income. And she thought they'd maybe have crafts and sales and manage little tea rooms and stores and so forth. But what she found was, as the tourists wanted to talk to the men, they thought they knew more. And also the men, more of them spoke French than the women did. So the men became the tour guides and the little tea house owners and the store owners and so forth. And they got more money, and they bought television sets. And the women sat on the couch and watched soap operas from the Middle East in Arabic. And their ideas and their norms about romantic love and traditional marriages were the things that were changing. So she came back hysterical from her dissertation work, saying she couldn't write anything about how women had improved, and I had to tell her that she had a total brand new idea, a case about modernity in the modern world, and what women do. It wasn't her expectation and all the hypotheses she had written for all the brands.
Thank you. It was a wonderful talk. Who invites the technology in to the community?
Who invites this technology into the community? Well, that's an interesting question. In fact, Ellen last night was helping me on some of the slides, and I had interventionist and I had self-help. Remember that one? And it says, well, that's not in the same league. But occasionally, somebody will get the idea because they have heard of it or seen it, and they bring it in, and it starts that way. But that is not usual, but it is possible. Usually, interventionists, which is to say aid development programs from national governments, the United States, Canada, Japan. JICA is, for a while there, was one of the absolute largest. The Chinese development aid and so forth, the Scandinavians and British are very, very big on bilateral, one country to another, all their development aid projects. But then over and above that are the multilateral, many-sided UN agencies, whether it's the Food and Agriculture Organization or United Nations Development Projects or United Nations Fund for Population, UNICEF, UNIFEM, all of those, and then our Gulf Fund, and there's just so many around the world. These are more multilateral and along with the bilateral ones. So they come in, they design these programs, they design these projects. Now, to make it more complicated, sometimes the people in the area really want those projects and are really willing to plug in. But sometimes it's a very hard sell. And so we have our ideas, oh yeah, these people should do X. And, you know, some, the leaders, they do it because there's some profits there. They'll, you know, they'll get education for their kids, or they'll get money, or they'll get farm tools, or whatever it is. But to really get to the local populations, it's really hard. In the Haiti project, they linked up with Agricole, what's it called? Zadama Agricole, the comparable thing we call Farmers Health thing. And they were working with the community. They had 70 students at their school, and each student was supposed to work with about 100 farmers, families. And so they branched out, and they were able to reach 1,500 families with the very initial ideas that this could work. And then if they saw some real takers, those were part of that small group of farmers.
I got back up because you made me think, is this a role for the faith communities in those areas to help the introduction of technology?
Yeah. Okay, here's the issue. It's a really important issue. I don't want to step on anybody's toes, but it's a really important issue. What kind of technical and scientific capacities do faith-based NGOs, local NGOs, national NGOs, and international NGOs have? We know some of them are the best in humanitarian aid. Once they move out of humanitarian aid into scientific, research-based kinds of ideas, I think that has to be examined, which is not to say that they can't do it. It just is to say that they have to have on their staff scientists, and they have to have technical people, and they have to have people who understand these things in addition to the humanitarian aid. So it's all possible, but only some of them have that capacitation. The ones in Haiti did, by the way. Caritas was there, and their technical stuff is amazing. You know, I was most impressed, but I have seen lots of them that are very much interested in helping, but they can't figure out how thick should that mulch be, as if for instance.
Thank you again for a wonderful presentation. I have a question that sort of follows on the previous question. I also wanted to mention we had a wonderful presentation 10 years ago at a conference by a woman named Florence Reed from Sustainable Harvest, which is an organization that you may have run up against that operates primarily in Central America with exactly the focus of helping farmers to bring in all sorts of capabilities of exactly this sort. And I don't remember that they said anything, that she said anything in particular about the status of women, but it would be interesting to see what they do. But the question that I find extremely puzzling about fostering all of this kind of thing is, why is it, and maybe the answer is just a question of national elites not finding this kind of thing to be a particular priority, but why is it that these programs are not massively supported by national governments? I cannot imagine anything that would do more to increase the health and welfare of your population in many countries, which is largely rural, than to make this perhaps one of the most important kinds of programs that a national government in a country with people in this kind of status would support. And yet these programs always seem to be being funded by external development agencies, volunteer groups, perhaps religious communities, etc. And I'd be interested in your perspective about that. And then a separate question is, I would certainly like it to be the case that these kinds of improvements to the status of women that you are talking about do in fact resonate with religious traditions. But one has the impression, or at least this one has the impression, that that is not necessarily true. And I would be interested in your perspective on that issue.
In Malawi, many years ago, there were openings for people from the Ministry of Agriculture to go for advanced degree training, masters and PhDs. So they collected all the CVs of the people, men and women. And when he opened the drawer, I saw that he had taken all the curriculum vitas of the women and put them on the bottom. And I think that was the first time I got a clue about why national governments or people in charge or people in the ministries of agriculture and elites didn't want to help women because the resources were scarce. Actually, there were only 40 masters and PhDs to be had. So why give them to women, or any of them? The only way any of those women in that ministry got trained was after the first year of finding only male candidates. Somebody in Washington, and I'm not sure it was even in the project, because I know too much about that one, said, hey, there aren't any women who were trained. You better have at least 5 or 10 or 15 or aim for 20%. And the next year, there were several women who came to the United States to get their degrees. So part of the answer is, I can't figure out conceptually, and none of us can, sitting in this room, why national governments don't do more on this. But because it gets implemented in, in ministries of agriculture or ministries of health, that's the terminology in developing countries, or because it gets implemented in this segment or that segment of government, these are considered scarce resources to send somebody for an advanced degree because their lives change and their incomes change. The same thing on land distribution. So at the more local you get, the more scurrying there is to control the resources around. I do think that's wonderful things. Now from the top, my other favorite example, sorry to be jaundiced on this, is from Nigeria. The first ladies in Nigeria, there have been several of them, who made women in development their cause. And I naively helped support that when I was at FAO because it sounded, oh my God, it's at the national level. She's the first, she's married to the president and is elected and all those good things. I thought it was called the 31st of December movement, and you can Google that. And find out about that organization, but it was so corrupt. Her husband was corrupt, she was corrupt, that whole administration was corrupt. And they took the money for women in development, and the number of women they ever helped, I suspect you could, it's not more than the number of people in this room. They built roads that went to the places they wanted to go to instead of to the marketing channels that they were supposed to have been used for. And what is so very interesting, some years later, Nigerian scholars, women scholars, did an analysis of all the first ladies and these kind of first ladies in Africa, and because they understood, they knew exactly the places and so forth, and so they delineated all the corruption. So I too just find it amazing that national governments and elites just don't jump on the bandwagon and say, yeah, let's get this thing done. It'll just be better for everyone. I do also think that the more different organizations, faith-based organizations, technical organizations, and ones that are, particularly, let's say, focused on agricultural activities and so forth, the more they get involved in all of these things, the better it is. For example, Oxfam has done marvelous work, the 1 Acre Fund. has done marvelous work on all of these kinds of things with women. And yet, we don't know about them very much. And we need sort of better coalitions of all these groups. Now, the United Nations does have a section for all the NGOs to contribute, and they're always there at all the meetings, for example. And they're always emphasizing their particularistic works, country by country, or several countries here and there. I marvel at the fact that it's as hard as it is to get the technical language into documents, that the governments have to sign these documents. They have to agree to them. Now, I realize the U.S. didn't even agree with, what was it, the rights of the child, but you know, most of these governments are signatories to these conventions. And so at least they have to read them, think them through, and when projects happen in their area, they can actually expand them. I'm not familiar with too many case studies of people coming in who want to give projects and the government saying, hey, could you just make it bigger and help more women? I don't think I've ever heard that happen. I would love to be wrong. But it is extraordinary, and that is why in the declaration that I would hope IRAS would have, it starts out with government will. And I think that that is really important, and changes in national policy as we hear. So otherwise we just have the BAU scenario. And
Thank you,
I
Anita.
hope that
Thank you, Anita. I love your topic. I want to take just a moment to make an announcement which fits right in with your topic, and then kind of go on to a comment question. I want to remind people about tonight's movie, which is The Power of Community, How Cuba Survived Peak Oil. And that is a food-related topic of what you can read about in the Beacon today. But we've just added a new film for tomorrow night, and it seems like it's perfectly suited for anyone interested in women's issues. The film is about mountain women of Pakistan, and it's entitled Taller Than Mountains. And it is among the 10 UNESCO Women Empowerment Films. So that fits right in with your theme.
it does. What time is that?
It'll be at 10 o'clock, and I know no more about the movie, but Tariq is here, and I'm sure if you went to see him, he and his, is it your friend?
No, it's my daughter.
Your daughter?
She made the film for the rescue displays. And this is about the, when there were floods and earthquakes in northern Pakistan. This was made as a sequel to that. And it shows how, in the reconstruction of that area, the women empowerment program was put into implementation.
Maybe apropos of last night, she could, sorry for my addition here, maybe she would be willing to come down and talk about her direction of that film as well. The background that she encountered, in other words, her own observations, if she'd be willing to do that. It would be a really interesting part because it would sort of keep with what the director was for Pink Horn last night. Talking, we could have 2 film directors as part of it. Great.
And we just met with the, I mean, this is just a result of networking here, so we're very fortunate. But Anita, my comment and question is, and I want to pick right up on what Ted was saying about national governments and how it is that they just can't see the benefits in this and why it takes external factions to come in. I can't help but think that similar to what in Star Trek they call the prime directive, and how it's generally not it's not allowed to go into another culture and to tinker with the culture. I make an observation here that there's almost a twofer going here, whereby the work you're doing, it brings in agricultural improvement, which is sorely needed, and it also represents, in my view, a way of introducing and moving along the Western concept of women empowerment into other cultures. Since this particular IRAS seems to would be really hot right now to introduce new terms, I'm just gonna call that culture reform. So, which I think is kind of an okay thing. We're really getting a twofer here. So if you could just comment on any of that.
Yeah, the Scandinavians are very forward-thinking in so many ways, and the Norwegians at one year decided they were having a door-to-door campaign. Can you believe it? To raise money for women in development, they raised $50 million. I can't imagine something like that happening in the United States. When I say women in development, they think we're talking about bras or something. I'm serious. I've had people ask me if that's what I meant. Shouldn't say that. Anyway, they had the idea that how would people in the United States feel if the delegation came from Finland to kind of tell us that we really weren't doing very well on women in our country. And which is true. We have one of the worst maternal mortality and birth rate stuff. Sandra can give us the exact facts and figures. I mean, it's appalling in general. It's particularly appalling for our GDP and for being a developed country. It's off the charts. And we would rather do all kinds of things than clean that up in our own country. We would be appalled if those delegations came to us and shook their fingers and said, you need a development program here and there and so forth. And yet we think nothing of doing development aid and so forth in other countries. And we do it, you know, our development aid, as every other country that gives it, is located within its own State Department or whatever that's called, because it's an arm of policy and political influence. I think you have to understand that. So USAID is really in the Department of State. That's where it lives. And that's who signs all the cables ultimately, and so forth. But, so we have to keep that in mind. The other thing is, there are countries around the world and there are societies around the world where women actually have a lot of power. They are empowered. They know what they're doing. They're not fighting this every day. That's their culture. So, you know, we have had in the United States a very jaundiced and long history from Susan B. Anthony just to get the vote. And there's lots of countries that had the vote, women could vote before us. I will tell you that Switzerland didn't get the right for women to vote until 1964. How modern is that? Kuwait just managed to get it at some local levels in the last several years. I'm not sure, I can't remember the exact date. But in terms of the culture of empowerment for both men and women, and it's really interesting that we even have to talk about this discrepancy and talk about women's empowerment. We don't tend to talk about men's empowerment, although we do talk about poorer people being empowered in relation to their political system and the constraints that they have. But so that's part of this empowerment index. I don't know how successful it's going to be. If you Google GLEE, G-L-E-E, you will see all the people in Washington at the major think institutes talking about the Women Empowerment and Agriculture Index. And it's fairly hard to apply. They were grappling with this in Cambodia, where women are pretty much empowered in a lot of ways, traditionally. But they were talking about it because they had to translate all the questions and everything into local languages. And they